brand protection, supply chain and manufacturing, and trade. AAFA provides members with expertise across these disciplines to help members navigate the complex global marketplace. With unparalleled access to personalized casework, thought leadership, and unique resources and tools, AAFA is united through its mission, advocacy that fits. A quick technical note as we get started. We encourage everyone to participate and ask questions throughout the presentation. Please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. They will be answered during the Q&A segment of the presentation. We are also recording today's webinar, and it will be available for you to download on AAFA's Learning Center along with the presentation deck within 48 hours. If you experience any technical difficulties throughout, please contact GoToWebinar support at 1-800-263-6317. So presenting today from Centric Software, we have Ravi Rangan, who is the Chief Technology Officer, and Stacy Sharvin, who is the Chief Marketing Officer. Ravi joined Centric as Chief Technology Officer through the acquisition of Product Site Corporation in 2006 and is responsible for driving the company's technology strategy. Stacy joined Centric in 2015. She has more than 20 years experience in fashion and technology for companies like Lectra, Gerber Technology, Carrot Software, Cross Creek Apparel, and Perigee Software in marketing, communications, product development, and sales roles. The 3 key learning objectives that will be covered today include market trends and how the trends impact brands and retailers, why a record number of brands have turned to PLM since the beginning of 2020, and examples of brand roadmaps. So with that, Stacy and Ravi, please join me on webcam and let's begin. Hi, it's good to see you guys.
Hi, Beth.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Beth.
How are you guys doing today?
Good. We're discussing 10 years of change in 10 months, but I feel like it's been 100 years since the pandemic has started. I don't know about both of you.
I know, it does feel like a really long year. Okay, well, let's get right into it. Stacy, can you tell us a little bit about Centric Software and what you do?
Yeah, so before we jump into the topic at hand, I thought first we'd talk a little bit about who Centric is and then our credibility and why do we speak confidently on this subject. So Centric we're a software company, we're a technology company based in Silicon Valley. And for those of you who are not familiar with Silicon Valley, as I was not, I will admit, before working at Centric, it is a completely different mindset. So extremely innovation focused. It's very inspiring because down the road from Centric, you have companies like, Google or Netflix, big companies like that. So it's pretty amazing, actually, the environment. And then Centric has married that with being intensely customer centric. In fact, that's where the name of the company comes from, is Centric Software is customer centric. So we, like I said, Silicon Valley based, we have been working remotely since the beginning. Ravi, for example, is based in Washington State. I'm based in Montreal, Canada. Our head of innovation is in Seattle. Our headquarters is in Silicon Valley. Up until recently, our COO was in Miami. So, we get it. We've been doing this for a long time. So it's in our blood. But now, over the years, the company has grown immensely. So you can see some of the numbers up on the screen. But we're in over 30 countries. We are extremely fashion focused. In fact, we are fashion focused, which has allowed us to acquire very deep domain expertise. So, AAFA, like we get it, the difference between apparel and footwear and accessories. These are all very different things with very different deep specializations. And we've built a team around this. So what do? We focus on PLM. We're going to talk about that in a second, but using this PLM software, we help our customers bring over $1 trillion worth of goods to market. So it's pretty cool.
Awesome. Thank you. So I guess the next question we have is what is PLM?
Exactly. So so this is a polling question. There we go. So the poll is up. So audience members, please vote. Please let us know. Do you know what PLM is? or you have no idea. So I'll explain my version, and then we'll have Ravi explain his version. So for me, the way I usually explain it to people is PLM is a technology that's used by groups of people. These people, they're all working on product development or making products. The idea is to PLM helps bring products to market. These teams are never in the same building anymore. They're never in the same country, the same time zone. They don't speak the same language. They're not bringing products only to one market. It's usually multiple channels, multiple languages, et cetera, et cetera. So PLM helps everybody collaborate and helps teams decide what to make, what to sell, and then exactly how to execute everything. So companies adopt PLM for different reasons. It could be to optimize cost. It could be to improve speed, be more responsive, be closer to the consumer. But at the end of the day, they all relate to product. And of course, product for any brand, retailer or manufacturer, product is your lifeblood. So it's a pretty important foundation solution for a brand or a retailer. Ravi, how would you explain it?
Okay, yeah, I think you did a great job, Stacy. I guess from my perspective, I start dissecting PLM. You can see in the diagram that it's really starting from planning and going through development, detailed development, sampling, handing it off to production. We're also getting into receiving, for final inspection and things like that. So it's really covering the full cradle to cradle, because at the end we also are getting into recycling with a lot of the sustainability initiatives. So you have to actually prepare the product so that it can be recycled. So I think some of those initiatives are also coming in. I think one thing I would just layer in is when we start looking at all of these processes, there's information that's underlying all of this, right from the plans, the placeholders, the targets, to the design, to the costing from different suppliers perhaps, and then selling it to different channels, maybe at different prices, and then taking it all the way to inspection. So as you start to connect all the information that underlies this, you find that over time, as you look at companies and even history, the information semantics is actually fairly well defined and much more stable than the processes. The processes may change because of trends, may change because a new vice president comes along and wants to change the approval process or the organization structure. So we kind of see these layers of variability. So I think part of intellectualizing PLM is to just understand what's all the information that's underlying all this. You have to support the processes, but the processes are in a state of flux, especially in fashion. It was interesting, I think, thanks for the introduction, Beth. I think I've spent actually my entire career, over 30 plus years, in PLM, right from as a grad student. But I've worked in the early days in automotive, aerospace, medical devices, high tech, all in the PLM sector. And then the last 16 years in fashion. So when I look at all of these areas, one of the things you see is the clock speed of each of these industries is very different. Aerospace releases a product once a decade. A new airplane model, automotive is about 3 years. Fashion is 3 to 6 months. And with ultra fashion, you're getting that even more compressed. So part of what we have to understand with PLM, when we're actually a technology provider like ourselves, is we need to not just support the information structure and all the processes that are going to vary for natural reasons, but also all the trends and all the things that are shaping up, including everything we've seen last year with the pandemic. So I think PLM for me is really understanding our domain. For AAFA, it's apparel, fashion, footwear, a lot of consumer goods. The high speed of activities, the high volume of activities, a lot of people collaborating overseas, chaining that all in and still having an information structure that allows that to happen robustly, so that you have to balance the fact that a change here doesn't cause a butterfly effect, like a change all over, the organization. So you have to have structures in the information model and the PLM technology that allow you to properly assess what gets propagated, what gets insulated and suppressed, so that the organization is efficient. So I think PLM, in addition to everything Stacy said, for us is really intellectualizing that and providing a solution that meets that market and the process dynamics that underlies that. So
great. Thank you, Ravi. So now let's get into the 10 years of change that we've all experienced in the past 10 months that Stacey, you referenced earlier. Go ahead. I guess, Stacey, this one's for you.
Yeah. So yeah, virtually overnight, as we all know, a lot of people had to start working from home. So, we were, Ravi and I were lucky enough to be part of the 20%. So it was something that we were quite familiar with. But, like everyone, I mean, there was a point in my career where I had to start working from home. I didn't do that prior to my time at Centric. And it takes a certain discipline. There's no doubt that when you first experience this change, it is a big deal. It takes time to get used to it. And then if we go to the next slide, one of the things you have to set up, of course, is a home office. So it sounds kind of stupid, but getting a hold of some of this equipment is not that easy. I mean, there still are desks at IKEA. I experienced this personally a few weeks ago. They're still out of stock. So, everyone was kind of in a rush to do the same thing. If we go to the next slide, we all had to learn not only set up a separate space, but we had to learn new tools. So we can see, some proof of that on the screen where we look at the adoption of Microsoft Teams a little bit prior to the pandemic versus just recently, and then same idea with Zoom. So, I don't know about everyone out there, but I had also not had experience with either of these tools before. So, it's been an adaptation period for everybody. And one of the other technologies that we've seen companies move to really a massive adoption phase with is PLM. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that at Centric, that's had an impact on us and our customers as well. So there have been approximately 100 companies. I believe we're just a few shy of 100 since we signed another one this morning, of companies that have decided to adopt Centric PLM since the beginning of the pandemic. So, the question is why, who is moving to adopt PLM, and really why all of a sudden do they need it? So you can guess by the description of PLM that Ravi and I just gave that, it is a collaboration tool, so that especially if you're not able to go to the office and work face to face, having a tool to facilitate those interactions, facilitate approval, sharing of information, things like that is absolutely vital. If we go to the next slide, we can do a bit of a deeper dive. So into who is adopting PLM. So this is interesting. I think if you click once, Madison, you'll see there's animation. So, as head of marketing, of course, I was looking at this with a microscope to see, well, wow, what's driving this adoption? When the pandemic hit, we had, like everyone, all of a sudden, it's like everyone froze, right? Where we thought, no one's buying, what's happening, no one knows what to do. And then as the pandemic continued and roll on, that's where people came to terms with it, and they really started looking for solutions. And these solutions are really serving them both now during the pandemic, and then we know that they're going to help carry these businesses forward as we emerge out of the pandemic or into rolling lockdowns, et cetera. So we saw a massive adoption. The first group, if I had to group these into buckets, the first is emerging brands. So we saw a lot of sometimes younger brands, startups that are doing extremely well. It could be, a lot of direct to consumer. So brands with a strong online presence. There's a cool one that comes to mind called Frankie's Bikinis. They specialize in bikinis of all things that where they're experiencing a lot of growth, and they were looking for a solution to help them manage that. But it ranges to outdoor companies, a lot of gear manufacturers, for example, or even companies that make solutions to store gear. So all the outdoor products that we've all been buying since the pandemic. Or we see another group of emerging brands, and these are really the companies that I think of as, they were maybe started a generation ago, and the founders then passed these companies onto their children, and then the children are now taking over and they're modernizing and they're looking at systems. They're digitally transforming these businesses. So that's definitely interesting, and it's something that we're seeing worldwide. It's not at all exclusive to the U.S. The second big category are, I'd say, big retailers. And an example of this would be C&A in Brazil, who recently adopted Centric, where their businesses they're so complex and their teams are so big that they need solutions to facilitate collaboration and then really the management of the all phases of product development and execution. The third one are manufacturers. So this is something relatively new. We sensed a demand for this pre-pandemic, and then since the pandemic, it's really become evident that even manufacturers, in China, Southeast Asia, we have a handful of manufacturers in the US even, that are finally realizing the benefits of PLM and how PLM can help them, because PLM was traditionally positioned as a tool for brands and retailers, but that's not at all the case. And then the last is, I would really say most of these companies are really first-time PLM users. They had never had a solution before. Maybe they used a solution in a prior job role, a prior company, prior lifetime, or they work with people who had used PLM in past lives. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic hit and they said, yeah, you know what? We need a solution. There's a name for that. It's called PLM. So then they jump in and they adopt. So if you click medicine, you'll see then the next group. So we're getting into the why, and this is Ravi territory. So I'll leave it over to him.
Yeah, thank you, Stacey. I think in terms of why, we've seen, as Stacey indicated, we've had to directly work with over 100 customers, plus existing customers who've sort of taken what they've done and expanded it in light of the pandemic and some of the recent challenges. But on the first item of accelerate the digital transformation, I would kind of look at it from a couple of angles. One is we've seen customers who have had some PDM system or a PLM system, but they weren't meeting the needs, and they had a larger digital transformation initiative. And in a way, the pandemic sort of said, hey, we have to get this, otherwise we're really buckling from the pressure. We're not able to collaborate and work as we need to do. So that's been one. So sort of coming in from the existing customers who may have already had a PLM initiative, but now they're expanding it into other more transformative digital initiatives. The other side of it is just, companies that are startups and new, where they're just not able to keep up with the pressures of the pandemic. They used to work on a very tight budget, very lean and efficient, and now with this, they're not able to address it aggressively. So I think that's been a lot of the initiative in terms of digital transformation, coming at it either from existing or as a startup where you're working with the tools you have, like Excel or email, and you just need it to access. So that's been, I think, a spate. The other part of it is, I think some segments of our industry have shown some growth as people stay home, like home improvement, home items, outdoor activities. So we have seen, as we look at our customer base, there is a fair amount of it who are just getting a lot of orders. So they've actually had to come in and use this as a catalyst to basically manage the growth and use it as an improvement, something that they may have said, we'll wait for 6 months and start later, but now we can't because it's growing and we need to be efficient at doing this. Some of our customers actually, with the pandemic, they're actually doing products that are assisting the pandemic, so their growth is much more accelerated as a result. I don't say that in a positive way, but but that's just the fact of the pressure that they're facing. So how do you manage the growth in that context? The last one is interesting. I think we've all experienced this. I was actually in a customer workshop literally about more than a year ago when the initial pandemic news was coming, and right in the workshop, this was a customer that's used to making 4 trips to China every year for different parts of their process to execute their business activities for sourcing and the design stage and the negotiation stage, and finally in the product acceptance and the delivery stage. And Delta had just announced that they were canceling all flights overseas to China. And so the team was scrambling to see what to do. So I think with customers like that, they've also seen that, okay, we can't see the line, we can't negotiate price, we can't negotiate cost in person. How do we do that efficiently? So I think all of those things have sort of created a situation of urgency where they need a platform where it's not just, okay, I'm going to exchange files. I really need the semantics of the information that is underlying the process so that I can execute. And also these processes are evolving even within the pandemic. So they need to be agile. We've seen some customers who come in and traditionally they would have, these are large, fairly large customers, they would traditionally have said, okay, we'll go live in about 4 to 6 months. And now they're saying, no, we can't wait that long. We have to have a plan where we go live in a month and then incrementally go live subsequently in another month with some additional capabilities. So we've been able to also adapt, largely because of our configurability that we have in the product to meet those special needs that have come about. So I think it's been challenging from multiple angles, but it's also been, in some ways, our ability to actually help them out has been some contribution that we feel we're able to make, as we sit here 2 levels removed from what's happening through the technology. So that's been satisfying to help our customers achieve some of their challenges.
Ravi, if we can, sorry to jump in, Beth, if we can digress just 1 second. So you make me think of a couple of things. So one is the managing growth aspect. I heard a great expression one time. It was a speech that was being given by an SVP at Under Armour years ago when she was talking about why they purchased Centric. And she said it was to manage growth because the growth that they were experiencing was like drinking from a fire hose, which I thought was fantastic. But in you mentioned something, which was the idea that companies don't want to wait so long now to go live and start reaping the benefits of PLM. Can you maybe talk to that point a little bit? I can think of 2 examples. One I can mention the customer name, which is S. Oliver, and then the second one is the company. I think you'll know who I'm talking about, who you managed to bring live in a week because they had been hacked and lost all their data during the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, like I said, the nice thing is we have a product that is tuned for the industry, the domain practices, and so we're not taking a PLM and saying, oh, let me go discover what your needs are and then I'll customize it. No, we have a product. We have to, get certain specifics and then tune it for your processes with configuration. And that part of the equation we've done very efficiently. We actually use the same user interface that an end user would use to work with, your tech packs and your costing and so on and so forth. So it makes even our configurability very easy. And at times we will hand that over to the customer so they could manage it themselves. I think the key things there, Stacy, are, I remember an interesting principle. I think it's called the Eisenhower principle. This is from President Eisenhower. I think he would say, well, I'm getting a lot of problems. The urgent problems are not important and the important problems are not urgent, and from that came this Eisenhower principle for how you prioritize. I think you basically take stock of everything because, yes, if you want to do everything, there isn't the time if you want to go live within a month. So your core competence has to be in what I would call prioritizing. So I think a good rule from Eisenhower is if it's urgent and important, make it the top of your list. If it's important and not urgent, then keep it as a second item. If it's neither important nor urgent, take it off the list altogether. Now, if it's urgent and not important, you got to be really careful because we all remember yesterday's fire and we want to just replicate the solution to yesterday's fire. But maybe that doesn't happen that often. So you have to really think through if it's urgent and not important. So really using principles like that to really define, it's easy to add all the bells and whistles. It's a lot like, I think Blaise Pascal used the quote, I don't have the time to write a short letter, so I'm going to write you a long one, right? So it's easy to give me a laundry list of everything. It's much harder to give me a list that says, if I had this, I can really run the business and then I can incrementally grow. And that's whittled down. So I think when we have these challenges, like I have to go live within a week and then I'll continue to evolve from there, or I go live within a month and I'll evolve from there. Those two, what is that minimal set that I critically need for the business, and then what's a way to manage prioritization. If you can get that tightened down, coupled with the fact that we're already coming in out of the box with a lot of stuff, that we're able to provide you a safety net, even if you don't have some things in your list, because these things are just needed for the business. So you don't have to think about everything, just have to think about your top priority items. So that kind of a methodology helps, because ultimately, it's about you're having a need to go live within a week or a month in this pandemic situation for a reason, and you're really razor focused on surgically looking at what is that critical. And then we have the ability to kind of say, okay, once we get you, for example, once we get you with generating the tech packs, we can take you to the next level. We're working with the detailed costing. Maybe initially you just do FOB costing, and then you get to detailed costing. Those would all be the discussions we would have in managing the growth, so to speak. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Ravi. So I think moving on to the next question I have for you, it's actually for you, Ravi. What are some of your customers' most common needs?
I mean, I think with PLM, as the definition goes, right, it's collaboration. And I think in a way the pandemic has sort of accentuated the need for that to be more efficient. So certain inefficiencies that you could tolerate in the past, because you could always catch up with a visit and smoothen things out, you don't have that luxury. So your collaborative tools have to be also very precise and surgical. And so our ability to deal with fine-grained structures in the collaboration. So when you're telling me, here's the cost, it's not just a cost, it's the cost of this BOM line, with this color, with this size, with this variation of the product. So getting to that precision, so there's no ambiguity. So to me, the collaboration is with the precision. The fact that in the past, we were already pretty efficient based on the geography and the culture. Like, in some countries, the deployment has to be done on site. In the US, we've actually, over time, we've had a hybrid where we are on the customer site for certain periods of time. Other times we were working remotely quite efficiently. I think what's happened with this currently is we've been forced to do these remote deployments. In fact, I think the S. Oliver one that Stacy mentioned was primarily remote. It was a pretty large size deployment. And so, moving to tools that'll, the fact that we're web-based, and as we do configuration changes, the customer can directly take a look at it while we're with them online. So we're able to do that parallel processing in multiple dimensions. And that, because of what we said earlier, we're going live faster. Some of those are just pressures and sort of priorities imposed on the customer by the market or by the business. In the past, we used to do about 5 years ago, a lot of our customers were on-prem. More and more, everybody's going to cloud. So I think the fact that we have a readily available cloud solution. And I think one thing, like I said, I'd worked in the different industries in my past life. In some industries, like I know in aerospace, I could build a PLM system and throw it over to the engineers, and they, their processes are such that they'll be able to make it work. I think in a parallel fashion, it's got to be, we have a very diverse audience, right from the planners to the creatives to the sourcing, the merchandisers, etc. So our ability to have a really super user interface that is visual, and yet for those that need it, has the tables and the reports and the intuitive, the usability challenge when you have a structure that supports that collaboration, it's really like the perfect storm. Allow me a structure that covers all the different elements in fashion. I think one of the interesting things with PLM in our space, as opposed to PLM in other spaces, is in other spaces, the products are so complex that the PLM addresses a very narrow stretch of the entire life cycle. You can take a narrow stretch. I could spend my entire career trying to solve that narrow stretch. It might just be between how I do the detailed design and hand it over to manufacturing. And that's my lifetime career in PLM in an aerospace company. I think with fashion, the beauty is, as we saw in the earlier chart, for me, it's been really satisfying that I could take it all the way from planning all the way to selling and all the things in between. So you're really understanding the big picture as well as the details. And that's really satisfying if you have a very systems perspective. And so the ability to touch all of these and have an information structure where something happens, I don't have to propagate things that don't need to be propagated, and I can propagate things that do need to be propagated across the full chain in a very natural and easy way is really powerful. So I think that itself gives you a level of scalability beyond just the technology. The fact that the process is allowing for that scalability across these departments. I think everybody is very cost and price sensitive. So obviously, I think if you look at a lot of the inefficiencies there in just our regular practices, the fact that PLM is compressing, and we have a lot of case studies to back this up. There's just so many benefits you get beyond, just, okay, we're all collaborating. It's a single source of product data. But the amount of inefficiencies you're able to eradicate even in one season, pretty much, the ROI is very compelling. Now, if you do a pure, the challenge with ROIs is no one's calculating all the costs we're incurring right now. So if you do a very financial based ROI, the quantitative assessments data may not be there. In my past life, PLM has been justified by, I'll say, the motherhood apple pie type qualitative aspects. You just need it, otherwise you can't run a business. In today's world, but for those who are quantitatively aligned, I think even there, I think we have now the data to justify a PLM assessment. And then, the fact that these PLMs can't be rigid. In the old days, it was like, oh, build me a PLM. Oh, let me go figure out what you need. Let me go underground for 6 months and do something and show it to you. Maybe the business has changed in that 6 months and half of it is not relevant, and you go through a change cycle. So it's just you're always chasing your tail. And I think one of the things we've been able to do with PLM, because I think part of it is the luxury of focusing on this one industry, is we're able to really intellectualize all the structures and the configuration points where we know one customer may do it slightly differently from another because of various practices, and incorporating that in the product already also allows the customer to also, as change occurs in the business, they're also able to use that to say, oh, tomorrow I'm going to 5 other categories, and I can't just be treating everything like a dumb document. I have to have all the attributes and all the business rules for this category versus that category. And how do I do it in a very rapid way? All of those kinds of things are contemplated and put into the tool. So I think those are some of it's not just build me a PLM solution. It's the fact that PLM solution is going to be in a constant state of flux. And we have to have, as a fundamental requirement of the PLM solution, this constant need to, especially in this market. I think in other markets, we could say, in other industries, you could afford to be a little bit more static. But I think in our fashion apparel market, things are changing so fast that the fact that PLM is in a state of flux and PLM has to have it as a fundamental solution element, its ability to evolve in that state of flux and always be current with the customer's needs is, I think, almost a core requirement now. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. And I think part of our customer satisfaction has been because of that. It's not just the usability, it's the ability to rapidly evolve to meet the business challenges.
Okay. Great, thank you. Thanks, Ravi. So onto our next slide and question here. Like any technology, PLM has changed a great deal over the past few years. So can you tell us a little bit about those changes driven by market needs that happened in product life cycle management?
Yeah, and I think we may have an animation there that may be coming, so I can just, thank you for that. So I think one of the things we've been saying, and in some cases, like I said, with my background, having seen it, and 3D has been around for a long time, right, for decades. I think other industries have adopted 3D in the 80s and the 90s, and now we're seeing more and more in apparel. Now, the apparel 3D is a much more, you're getting into simulating shape and the flow and the draping and different characteristics in 3D, not just solid models like other industries may have. But we do see a lot of 3D adoption getting much more prominent now, and our tools are also accommodating and working closely with multiple 3D systems that do 3D authoring, but then bringing that 3D to the rest of the life cycle. So yes, you're authoring the 3D, but then you want to use it for sampling, you want to use it for costing. In some cases, we've seen customers actually take the 3D, which looks very realistic, almost like a product you'd see on a website, and put it on the website. So you as a consumer would not know whether this is a product or a 3D, and that's being used as a way to get signals from the customer to say, are they interested in this product? So I have a real product, a real apparel product on one side, and I have a 3D, and when you go to the website, they look identical. They look like you can have them all. And you go there and say, well, this one's in contemplation. Are you interested? We'll let you know, right? So, or it's out of stock. So that is used as a signal to say, oh, there's a lot of interest in that product. Let me start to build it now and make it available to the market. So 3D is not just 3D for fit or 3D for sample or 3D for costing. It's 3D is actually across the different life cycle segments. And we're seeing different customers use it in different ways for one part versus the other. The other is corporate social responsibility. I think as sustainability and a lot of the regulations come into play, we're seeing, carbon footprinting, waste packaging management, supply chain certification for various compliance aspects, circular economy and social responsibility, factory audits. Those are all coming into play. The planning aspect, has been slightly separate from PLM. PLM is originally started from specify the product, do the tech pack, do the costing over time, and then push it out. But now, planning is where we do all the financials, and ultimately the placeholder, the targets, the price, the margins are actually driving the product and bringing that into fore. And those also change with the life cycle, much like the product has a life cycle, the planning also has a life cycle. So keeping the two in sync, because products may get canceled from the line. How do you make sure you're not wasting time doing stuff that is not going to account for anything? So getting those signals in real time and reacting. The other thing we see is there's a blurring of the line between PLM and ERP, especially with samples management, because samples are funny animals. They may make the cut or they may not make the cut. So if they are going to make the cut, then yes, you can invest a lot of time in putting it into ERP. But if they're not going to make the cut, you're putting a lot of stuff. Sometimes you don't have the information and you have to fake it into ERP. So we're getting a lot of push in PLM to do stuff which is at the boundary of, I would say, PLM and ERP, like sample room inventory and, POs for sample orders and even POs to help with final inspection. The other is also the line between enriching the development product so that it's available for market and channels. What I think the acronym PIM is product information management, but it's really taking the more stable definition of the product after it's defined, enriching it maybe with language, with media, with translations, with market specific price, etc. And so before you push it to the e-commerce site or your selling agents, right? So that's also a line where it's blurring and we're sort of expanding and sometimes integrating with customers digital asset management, which is where you would store large media and PIM. So those are some of the trends along with others that are starting to perk up as we proceed. Yeah.
Great. Stacey, do you have anything to share on that?
Yeah, well, if we can go, we actually have a polling question on this too, to see if there's anybody who is looking at these initiatives as well. So where did we get these 4 topics? These are the result of we recently had a customer advisory board meeting. So we had about 40 companies from around the world, and we just simply asked them, what are key topics for you right now or in the months ahead? So that was their feedback. So we're curious to see if anybody else is experiencing the same thing. So we can leave that up for a bit. And then we have another trend to talk about that Ravi is going to highlight for us.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ravi.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So this one's interesting. I mean, we see a lot of other, I think, are we going
next
to
slide? Yeah, next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if you could go to the next slide. Yeah. So I think, there's a lot of different, some of it actually sort of bordered on the pandemic, but I think we're seeing, as I said, there's a constant state of flux. I think we've all gotten used to fast fashion. There was a recent article with this term ultra fast in the Atlantic, in the Atlantic magazine about ultra fast fashion, which are, instead of doing products a few hundred a week, so that you go to the store every week to see what's new, and if it's there, you buy it because it's not going to be there next week. That was kind of the fast fashion revolution. And I think now it's almost like 24-hour news cycles. You go to the website and you see stuff that wasn't there when you went the last time. And that's the pace at which some of the ultra fast fashion trends are evolving. So they're taking styles, doing variations, they're getting proposals. They kind of maintain inventory to small levels because they know they're servicing this trend of really rapidly emerging activities. So we're seeing that, which means from a PLM standpoint, it's our ability to really work with that velocity and adapt styles and sort of channel them through the process as you to meet that, and maybe even search and make those styles available. The other aspect is we've all seen, almost every company has been marketing face masks and a lot of personal gear in the last year of the pandemic. So I think the ability to very frequently add new categories, some of it through acquisition or take away categories by divestiture, or just see new trends and build in the categories. So by categories, I'm not just saying let's do a style. I'm really saying you need to really understand the characteristics of each category and how those are going to be easily adapted into PLM as a very steady state activity. So it's not even a configuration activity. It's something that you're just evolving as you start to use it. We've seen a lot of business pressures that are coming in. And again, the ability, for example, with the recent China tariffs we had overnight, we actually had a customer who went live. Within a day or within a week, they had the 25% China tariffs imposed, and all the landed cost equations had to be re-looked at because of the tariffs, right? So we were able to go in and literally in a few days solve that problem and make sure that all past products were also accounted for and things like that. So how do you just rapidly deal with stuff that happens? Some you can anticipate, some you can't, and just working with a lot of those pressures as we go through. So we see that as something we have to constantly take on as PLM.
Great, thank you, Ravi. Stacy, next one for you. When you and I were preparing this discussion, you talked about this recent study that you published on the cost of failure. Can you tell our audience about that and your findings?
Yeah, so this is it's an interesting story. This is it was a piece of research that we did because we looked at our customer base and we started noticing that wow, there are a lot of these companies that had bought and implemented a different PLM in the past, and then for various reasons they were getting rid of it and they were adopting Centric instead. So when we did the math, it turns out there were about 150 companies that have done this. So out of the 400 odd customers that we have, 150 of those had bought the PLM from a different vendor in the past and swapped it out for ours. So we went, my team and I decided to interview some of these companies and to ask them confidentially, of course, why they did that, and then what advice they would give to those people out there who might be shopping for a PLM, to how to avoid making a mistake or choosing a poor solution. So it's a piece of research that I can send out to people. So my contact information is going to be at the end. So if anybody wants it, just let me know. But to give you a recap, so we interviewed 12 companies, so all different types of profiles of companies from around the world, US, Europe, and Asia, on their experiences. So in general, like in a nutshell, the feedback they gave, what led them to choose the wrong PLM, or how would they do things differently next time? The number one answer was not doing their homework, actually not doing due diligence. And so what does that mean? It means asking for references. It means talking to people that you know in the industry. It means talking to peers or colleagues, maybe that have had experience with other solutions. What's the word on the street? One thing that we see from our perspective is, if you're looking for a solution, some of the questions that are really important to ask about companies that are similar to yours. Doing the same types of products that you're doing. It could be the same types of general type of business model or process. It could be, sometimes it's a question of geography. We were getting reports out of Brazil, for example, where there are other PLM vendors that don't have local teams. And that meant that every time there was a support issue, that it not only had to be done in English, and not all the users were comfortable with that. They speak Portuguese, not English. So it's normal that you would want support in your native language. And it might sound like not that big a deal when you're, being wowed, I'd say, by the demo and by the show and tell phase of an evaluation. But, when it comes down to the day-to-day, these are the little things that matter. And these are the things that impact whether you get the most value for money possible. So that was a big one. Free is never free. So if someone is giving you something for free, it's because there are strings attached always. Our CEO said, and maybe he pulled this from someone else, I don't know, someone else's quote, but the price of failure is low, but the cost of failure is very high. So it might look free on paper, but it's not really free. There's a cost there, even if it's hidden. And then in terms of the two other pieces of advice one is change will happen. You don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I mean, a year ago, none of us, or a year and a half ago, none of us ever would have anticipated a pandemic. So the only thing is you don't know everything. You don't know what you don't know. So that the whole point of these kinds of systems, whether it be a PLM or a different type of business system, is that it has to be adaptable over the long term, because business life is not a static event. It's going to need to change. So you want a solution that's going to evolve as well. And then the last thing is, again, goes back to kind of doing your homework, is get user input. There were a number of customers that I spoke to who said that the reason they chose the wrong system is because they were only looking at it from the point of view that, yeah, this would be great for sourcing, or yes, this would be great for product specs, but they didn't really look at it holistically. So it goes back to one of the points that Ravi made, where the idea of PLM is it's exactly what the name says. It's the life cycle of the product. It's not just part of a product or part of a process. It's everything. And we can see from some of the things that the fourth areas that our customers highlighted, that Ravi explained, even the idea of what do you do with PLM? How do you connect to it? What types of technologies are being married together? How the processes are changing, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's a constant evolution, right? Which is cool, which is, that's what it's meant to do, really. So those are some of the key learnings that, I'd say people who have been through it before, key advice that they have to offer.
Awesome. Thank you, Stacy. So as we're wrapping up here, can you share other technologies that are transformative for an apparel company, and what is your outlook for 2021? Maybe Ravi, do you want to start here?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing we clearly see, apart from the four that I'd mentioned, I'll just say that the thing that's been coming up, I see a lot, is sustainability, and we're seeing a lot of stats, like, for instance, I think for every 5 the garments we produce, we dispose 3 of them every year. So as we generate, and we're generating a lot, we're also disposing a lot. Fashion's accounting for 4% of greenhouse gases, and the UN, I think, estimates 20% of wastewater from fashion. So I think that there's just a lot of sustainability aspects, and this is not just maintaining certifications. This is getting down to, tracking carbon footprint around your materials, your style development, your own operations, and things like that. The other that we see a lot is as we go through the life cycle, there are certain activities that are repetitive that can benefit from historical or descriptive analytics. So I think the use of machine learning and AI is slowly, we're seeing a lot of our customers, much like a few years ago, they were talking about 3D, and now 3D is really ramping up. A lot of early adopter customers are starting to look at AI and machine learning. Again, the trick there is, as our CEO said, it's a solution waiting for a problem. So I think like anything else, you got to be really surgical about what are the specific problems that you think can be assisted by these technologies, and then be very precise, because it does mean that you have to provide the training data sets, which are, these solutions are only as good as what you feed into them. So if you don't have the training data sets by which they can get trained, their ability to get trained will not be that efficient. So some of it has to be curated with a combination of how much data you can reliably have and harvest, and then use that. But we are seeing AI and machine learning to be key. The other thing that we see a lot is social media type connections. We have in our latest release integrations with Slack, and we're seeing a lot of these general purpose tools being used and how they connect with the whole product lifecycle, because it's not just what's happening in your company, it's what's happening in the whole ecosystem that has to maybe give product ideas. We're also seeing AI being used to actually generate product ideas by scouring the net and seeing all the trends out there, and then feeding them as very structured product proposals that we can then elaborate on as we go through the life cycle. I think more than anything else, just doing the first principle, I think apart from technology, just being very clear about, I have to go broad and deep. I can't compromise the semantics of the information and the use cases I need as I go broad, and being really clear about where those priorities are. So when we come in with PLM, we can really hit the ground running, because we know what your priorities are, or we can advise you on what the priorities could be easily achieved based on some rapid deployment methodologies with the out-of-the-box tool sets. I think being sort of adaptive to that, because sometimes, in the old days, you'd have a requirement spec, and by the time you did everything, the market had completely changed, so you could pretty much throw away the system you built. So part of the challenge was always, how do you anticipate the requirements that are going to be there 2 years from now, or 6 months from now, or 3 months from now? On the other hand, you can't, because the reality is you can't anticipate it, no matter how smart one is. We found that out with the pandemic. So you just have to have a PLM system where change is built in as a very core part of its solution mechanism. And it's not just configuring it to what you want today, but allowing you to evolve to where you want it to be tomorrow in a very natural, steady state way. Because otherwise, I don't think you have a PLM system. You have basically a PLM system at a point in time that's guaranteed to go obsolete real fast.
Well, thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Stacy and Ravi. We're just about at time, but we have a few minutes so we can take a few of the audience questions. So as a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the question box in your control panel. We will address as many as we can. And the speakers will respond via email to any unanswered questions after the webinar. Okay, so first up, what is the difference between ERP and PLM? My company needs both. Should we implement both at the same time?
Okay, I think PLM is starting from the concept until you get the product completely defined. So there's a lot of change going on, a lot of uncertainty, you're trying to resolve issues. So the PLM tools are built for that kind of change and evolution of the products. ERP tends to work, it's more transactional. You give it the master data, it manages the master data, and then the data has to be accurate. So sometimes if you implement a PLM system, if you implement an ERP system without having accurate data, I think the traditional statistics are you need the BOM to be about 99.5% accurate for the MRP run to be of any use. In other words, if it's lower than that, your MRP runs are going to be pretty much a waste. So you can't order against the MRP run. So ERP needs very confident data to perform well, and PLM is dealing with all the change. So I think the fact that you have to have, if you implement PLM without having the confidence in the data, you're basically subjecting your operations to that perturbation. So I think PLM, since it's building out that data and also completing it with a high degree of confidence, because you're going through all the processes, you're filling in all the business rules, you're doing all the structures and semantics and constraints and compatibilities and validating everything. Once you come out of it, the product definition is pretty solid, and then you can sort of drive ERP confidently. So I think that should be, in my view, the order, because the numbers say it all. You can, if you try to do ERP with data that isn't very accurate, it's not going to be a very good result.
Or otherwise said, garbage in, garbage out, and poop flows downhill. So you don't want poop flowing downhill. No, seriously, awesome. we had a customer that told us last week during our customer advisory board meeting that that for them, PLM was taking over as the most important system. But it has taken the place of ERP, because what you're making, the conceptualization, the costing, the what ifing, all that goes on, now is getting to the point where that's the challenging question. People have mastered the operational aspect, the execution aspect of moving inventory and all that. But the harder question is how to stay closer to the customer and how to respond to what the market wants.
I'd just add, if I could, I think I just remembered a point from my past. It's really, PLM is managing intellectual property. ERP is managing physical assets. And unfortunately, and I was taught this in a course I took in 1986 in grad school, and I never understood it then. It was too abstract for me at that time. And it was all to do with accounting systems, because with accounting systems, you have to count every nut, bolt, and screw as an asset that you have in your organization, and that rolls up in your accounting process, and that's part of your financials. Whereas intellectual capital, like if I build a model or if I build a design of a style, that is not given a material number, so financial. So as a result, its management has sort of, is sort of not, supported by the accounting system. So as a result, everybody gets fixated on ERP as, oh, I'm counting every nut, bolt, and screw, but all these models and designs you're building they're like crown jewels, and you're not valuing them. And PLM is really the housing of that. So it's also getting back to the basics, and not, the accounting system was done for a purpose, but we've sort of let our whole business run by these general accounting principles and missed some of the core elements. Anyway, that's what I was taught 30 years ago, and I think I'm learning now. It's taken a while, but
now you've lived it enough times.
I get it. Now I get it. But don't teach it too early. You got to teach it just when you're right.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. We do have more questions, but unfortunately we can't get to them right now because we've run out of time. So I want to thank our speakers, Stacy Charbin and Ravi Rangan. On behalf of AAFA, we would like to thank you for joining this session, and thank you to Centric Software for sponsoring today's program. An email with the links to the PDF and recording from today's program will be sent to you. Again, thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you. Bye-bye.